Martin Heidegger, a German philosopher, has expressed discontent with the direction of Western metaphysics. He says that Western metaphysics has strayed since the time of Aristotle by focusing on the study of the existent, and argues that the true subject of metaphysics should be existence itself. He views his philosophical endeavor as the beginning of a new chapter in Western philosophical thought. In Islamic philosophy, this distinction between existent and existence was systematically made by Mulla Sadra 3 centuries before Heidegger. As Sadra says, he receives an inspired vision in which he has perceived everything as acts of existence or wujud rather than mere objects that exist or mawjud. Mulla Sadra's entire philosophical exposition is centered around the mystical experience of wujud as reality. While our usual experience of the world is focused on individual existing things, which forms the basis of Aristotelian metaphysics, Mulla Sadra's vision portrays the entirety of existence not as separate existing objects, but as a unified reality that appears as a multiplicity due to its delimitations by various quantities or mahiyya. These delimitations create the illusion of various independent existence. Islamic philosophy that later developed under the influence of Mulla Sadra's thinking emphasizes the distinction between the concept or the notion of existence and its reality. Conceptually, existence is the most universal and readily understood concept among all existing concepts, while its reality is something intricate to grasp, and it is never captured by our mind, even though it is in fact something strikingly self-evident and real. The mind can only apprehend essence and general ideas. In other words, as Sadra puts it, quote, all the concepts come from the phenomenal world and are fully comprehended by the mind, although the mode of their being keeps changing. But given the fact that the existence by its very nature is external to mind, and all that exists outside of the mind can enter into mind, or else its nature will be perfectly transformed. Hence, existence can never be comprehended by any mind. In this episode, we are going to try to briefly explore Mulla Sadra's perspective on wujud or existence. Of course, it's just introductory. If you enjoy this video, please give thumbs up and please help share this video. Thanks in advance. You can also be part of this YouTube channel's growth and fuel our intellectual journey together with your support. Thank you so much for your support. As a philosophical term, existence is impossible to define in the usual sense employed in logic, which distinguishes between genus and differentia. Furthermore, generally, anything unknown is always defined in terms of something known. However, there is nothing universally known other than existence. Therefore, the word existence cannot be defined. Quote, we could never comprehend the truth of existence and its depth, neither by an explanation that includes of genus and differentia, nor by description that comprises of genus and special accidents, nor by any synonym. Because the conception of the reality of external truth over things lies in the apprehension of that thing in the mind and the passage of that concept from the external world to the mind. This truth holds for all things except existence, because the passage of existence from the external world to the mind would neutralize its truth, and what is known by the mind is a replica of the reality of existence, not its reality. Thus, we can have the access to the reality of existence not through definition or demonstration or by knowing by words and terms, but only through the intuition. First and foremost, it is important to emphasize that there is a distinction between how we perceive existence in the realm of notion or concept and how it manifests in the external world. We should be cautious not to confuse this fundamental distinction. The level of notion pertains to our ability to mentally conceive the existence of something that corresponds to an actual external presence. In cases where a concept aligns with an external reality, we can attribute a conceptual nature to that concept of existence. For example, the concept of man corresponds to the external reality of John, so we can assert that the concept of man exists. In fact, we could argue that any concept corresponding to an actual external entity, not merely hypothetical or metaphorical one, can be considered to possess a genuine existence. On the other hand, when we refer to the level of external reality, we acknowledge that existence permeates the entire external world. Stating that something exists means that it shares a commonality with external reality, representing an existence that exists externally and distinctly from non-existence. This type of existence cannot be purely conceptual. It must also have an external and existential presence. We can say it as having an existential thingness. Mulasatra contends that by distinguishing between the two aspects of existence, we uncover two fundamental ontological categories: essence or quantity or mahiyya, and existence, wujud. To illustrate this distinction, we can draw an analogy. Imagine seeing an unfamiliar being approaching from a distance. Initially, we know its existence, but its specific identity remains unknown to us. As it comes closer, we gradually identify it as an animal, a human, or something else. This demonstrates that existence can stand independently, whether or not we have a complete understanding of it. However, its conceptual identification relies on our mental comprehension of it. Thus, existential thingness has to be separated from the conceptual or mental thingness, which constitutes its quantity or essence as distinct from the existence it pertains to. The concept of existence in this particular context is something that naturally and spontaneously arises in our mind. It is self-evident in our everyday lives when we encounter statements like, "There is a book" or "the book exists." We immediately grasp the meaning without any need for reflection. Our understanding of those statements happens instantly and we react accordingly. This immediate mental response without any intervening process of inference precisely represents the concept of existence. Moreover, not only is the concept of existence inherently self-evident, but the discernment that it is self-evident is also self-evident. No concept is more intuitively clear than the concept of existence. It cannot be reduced to anything else, while all other concepts ultimately trace back to it. In other words, without this preconceptual comprehension of existence, we would not be able to understand anything else. In terms of existence, Muslim philosophers typically make attempts to grasp its meaning through statements such as, "Existence is that through which something else becomes possible to know," or "Existence is that which is the source of all effects," or "What makes it possible to know something is its existence." However, it is important to avoid confusing existence with an external cause in the Aristotelian sense. Existence is not a distant or external cause. Instead, it is the intrinsic ontological reality that defines the existence of all entities. The connection between existence and existing entities is not akin to the relationship between a builder and a house. Rather, it's more like the connection between a speaker and speech, where if the speaker is silent, there will not be speech. Another term derived from the word wujud, which also holds philosophical significance, is mawjud, existent. This term distinctly differs from the term wujud as the act of existence. Existence as the singular ontological reality serves as the unifying foundation for the various grades and modes of its own self-manifestation. Every entity is rooted in the reality of existence and ontologically depends on it. While existence is the ultimate ontological reality, it is not an existent or mawjud. Nevertheless, their distinction does not negate their unity, as an existent is a manifestation or mode of existence. In addition, existence is eternally real, while its modes are temporal and subject to continuous change. According to Mullah Sadra, an existence is objective but not a reality, and the potential for all specific existence arises from existence itself. Existence, which always is, constitutes the fundamental reality underlying all existence. According to Sadra, existence is a general attribute that is equivocally applied to everything. This leads to the understanding that all entities or objects share a common characteristic, which is existence itself. However, this also implies that each entity or object possesses existence at different levels, depending on factors like intensity, weakness, order, or perfection. All existence share this common characteristic, indicating that they are all included in existence. Succinctly, existence is fundamentally one, but due to differing levels, the degrees of existence can vary. Let's illustrate this concept with an example. Consider three different tables. Table A is exceptionally sturdy and made from high-quality wood. In Mullah Sadra's view, this table has a strong existence because its existence is a prerequisite for its essence. The existence of table A is robust and powerful. Table B is an ordinary table made from lower quality materials. Its existence fulfills the essence of the table but is not as strong as that of table A. Therefore, table B is considered to have a lower level of existence. Table C is a damaged table with cracks. Its existence is not as strong as it once was, as its existence may no longer meet the essence of the table. Table C is seen as weaker and less perfect compared to table A and B. In this context, Mullah Sadra would argue that the existence or being of these tables is the same, a common attribute, but their individual usages of existence are equivocal, meaning they exhibit different levels of strength and weakness. This simple example illustrates how Mullah Sadra's perspective on existence relates to varying degrees of existence in different entities or objects. It's important to remember that Sadra is not just a philosopher, but also an ascetic Sufi, so his views were built up upon his mystical experiences. A consequence of the mystical experience of existence is the realization of its unity, known as Wahdatul Wujud. Said Hossein Nasr argues that this concept is a fundamental pillar of Sadrian metaphysics, and that without it, his entire worldview would crumble. This key doctrine in Sufi metaphysics is most closely associated with Ibn Arabi, but it has been subject to various interpretations. These interpretations range from the extreme view of the Andalusian Sufi and philosopher Ibn Sabi'in, who posits that only God is real and nothing else exists in any manner, to Ibn Arabi's interpretation, which sees the whole cosmos as God's self-manifestations of the divine names on the canvas of nothingness. Mullah Sadra offers yet another perspective, conceiving the unity of being in relation to the multiplicity of existence as similar to the relationship between the sun and its rays. The rays of the sun are not the sun itself, yet they are, in essence, the sun. It is important to emphasize that the term Wahdatul Wujud represents an intricate system of metaphysics that is constructed upon a distinctive perception of reality. As the term Wahdatul Wujud clearly signifies, this foundational vision revolves around existence or wujud. In other words, the philosophy of Wahdatul Wujud is essentially a theoretical or rational reconstruction of an original metaphysical vision, one that is perceived as intuitive understanding of the reality of existence. It is essential to bear in mind that existence in the specific context does not align with our everyday experience that we naturally hold. In other words, it is not the existence as perceived in our ordinary empirical consciousness. Instead, it represents existence as it is revealed exclusively to a transcendental awareness, as intuited by a mystic when transcending the empirical realm of cognition and entering the trans-empirical dimension of consciousness. In our daily empirical experiences, we are constantly surrounded by countless objects or entities, each characterized by various attributes or qualities. To distinguish an object from its attributes, we grant the object a distinct ontological status from its attributes. In the realm of everyday empirical experience, we tend to assume that the existence of the object inherently precedes the existence of its attributes. This means that the attributes rely on the existence of the object, while the object itself is not affected by the existence of its attributes. For instance, we say the flower is red. In this case, it appears evident that the attribute red can only be actualized when the object, that is the flower, already exists. Even if the flower loses its red color and changes, its existence remains unaffected. However, this observation does not hold true for existence itself when treated as an attribute. When we say, for instance, the flower exists, the actualization of this attribute does not presuppose the prior actualization of the flower. On the contrary, it is in the specific examination that the attribute brings the flower into existence. This is what Ibn Sina highlights as the distinctive nature of existence as an accident. It is categorized as an accident, but according to Ibn Sina, it behaves in an entirely unique manner compared to all other accidents. Suhrawardi's stance on existence becomes intricate because, despite explicitly denying any objective reality to existence, he essentially shifts what he rejects about existence to the metaphysical realm of light. The nature of metaphysical light being inherently self-revealing and the source of all other manifestations, as well as its structured hierarchy, effectively blurs the boundary between Suhrawardi's concept of light and the understanding of existence as presented by Mullah Sadra. In other words, the real light in the technical vocabulary of the Illuminationists is essentially identical to the reality of existence in the terminology of Ibn Arabian and Sadrian philosophy. The only distinction between these positions lies in the ways in which the absolute metaphysical reality is experienced, whether one perceives the absolute reality as pure existence or pure light. The experience itself is fundamentally of a mystical nature. Put differently, those who establish existence as the foundation of their philosophical thoughts align with Ibn Arabian tradition, while those who emphasize light as the fundamental concept belong to the Suhrawardian tradition. Historically, Mullah Sadra serves as the point where these two philosophical traditions within Islam converge. The outcome of this convergence is the notion that existence is a luminous reality that manifests itself in various degrees and modes. For Sadra, existence is a singular reality, and the perception of existence as multiple is considered an illusion. Then why is there the multiplicity we perceive in this world? In Sadra's view, the various existences in this world show different, intense degrees of a unified whole. When we consider propositions like the flower is red, there is a structural correspondence between our grammar and the external reality. In other words, the logical or grammatical structure of the sentence mirrors and replicates the structure of the external reality that the proposition aims to describe. However, in existential propositions such as the flower is existent, There is a clear distinction between the grammatical structure and the external reality. Logically or grammatically, the term flower serves as the subject, implying a self-subsisting substance, while the predicate, existent, signifies a quality that qualifies and defines the object in a particular way. Yet, according to the proponents of Wahdatul Wujud, in reality, the flower is not the true subject. The actual ultimate subject is existence, Wujud, and the flower, along with all other entities, are merely qualities or attributes that differentially determine the ultimate subject, which is existence. Although so-called entities or objects are essentially not noun, but adjectival, modifying and characterizing the singular reality known as existence. Hence, the structure of external reality as implied by the statement "the flower is existent" starkly contrasts with the grammatical structure of the sentence. What is existence in the very meaning of the word is existence itself as the absolute indeterminate rather than the flower. Being a flower merely represents a specific self-determination of the absolute indeterminate. It constitutes a particular perceptible form in which existence manifests itself within the realm of the so-called external, tangible world. In essence, the flower functions as an attribute or adjective that characterizes existence, determining it into a particular phenomenal form. Existence itself, in its inherent purity, lacks attributes. It is an entirely simple unity or an absolute absence of discrimination. Consequently, all distinctions observable at the level of sensory experience among various entities should be considered illusory. The following subjects to examine concerning the structure of the reality of existence pertains to the position of God in the Satrian metaphysical framework. Given that in the system, the reality of existence is a single reality diversified into multiplicity through its intrinsic degrees and determinations, the highest degree naturally corresponds to God. However, even the lowest degree represents an intrinsic limitation of the same reality. Between the highest and the lowest levels, there exists an unbroken continuum. Does this imply that there is no fundamental distinction between God it as the necessary being and the contingent beings? To provide a comprehensive response to that question within the context of Islamic philosophy, it is essential to give an initial clarification of three significant technical terms: negatively conditioned, non-conditioned, and conditioned by something. These terms are primarily associated with the discourse on quietity rather than the discourse on existence. Nevertheless, they hold relevance in the context of discussions about existence, as Muslim philosophers employ these three terms when addressing the nature of existence. Let's begin by offering a concise elucidation of the three terms within the discourse on quietity. Each quietity can be understood from three distinct aspects: as purified or negatively conditioned, as absolute or non-conditioned, and as mixed or conditioned by something. First, negatively conditioned state. In this state, a quietity is considered in its pure form, with no external or mental associations. For example, the concept of animal is represented as just animal without any additional attributes. If another concept like rational is added, it creates a combination of two independent elements, and the original concept animal cannot be applied to the composite. Second, non-conditioned state. In this state, a quietity is represented indeterminately. It can be associated with other concepts or remain free from association. If another concept is added in this state, it forms a perfect unity, and the original concept can still be applied to this unity. For instance, animal plus rational equals man. An animal can be predicated of man. And third, conditioned by something state. Here, quantity is already associated with another concept, such as animal plus rational. In this state, animal is considered as already actualized and specified, not as animal by itself, but as animal in association with rational, essentially as man. We can now utilize this threefold categorization in the context of existence. According to Mulasatra, as we have noted, existence is one single reality that encompasses varying degrees, grades, stages, and modes characterized by differences in perfection, deficiency. The highest stage, God, is pure and transcendent existence in the state of the negatively conditioned, free from any determinations or limitations, representing pure transcendence. In the non-conditioned stage, existence is indeterminate and can take on any form, holding the potential for all possible existence within its unity. It is a stage where existence, described as unfolded existence, embodies both unity and multiplicity simultaneously, which is called the breath of the All-Merciful in Sufi terminology. In the lowest stage, known as conditioned by something, existence is fully determined, representing concrete individual entities. At this level, existence is the farthest from its original transcendental purity as it has become associated with quantities. So the reality of existence has three strata. The first stratum is pure existence, devoid of any association with anything other than itself, representing the transcendent essence of God. The second stratum is unfolded existence, akin to a pure and simple light beam radiating from the source of light, with the capacity to manifest in diverse ways, symbolizing the self-revealing aspect of God. The third stratum consists of particular existences, which are the realized stages of unfolded existence and become quantities when perceived as independent entities. Thanks for watching. Please consider supporting me on Patreon or PayPal. See you next time.